Hello, everybody. Good evening. Guess who thought the live stream started at 9 o'clock? That's right, me. Apologies, everybody who's been here for 15 minutes patiently waiting, but it's the first time I've ever stepped into a full room. It's nice to have 30 of you just waiting here. Normally, it kind of like starts with like 3 and then filters largely. I didn't forget. I just got my time wrong. Got it completely wrong. I actually got a phone call from Wesker in the chat. He was like, King, are you okay, man? What's going on? I was like, what's going on, man? I'm chilling, bro. Everything okay? You alright? He's like, live stream. I was like, what time did I schedule it for? I was like, damn, I thought it was 9 o'clock. Sorry, people. How's everyone doing this very fine Wednesday evening? It's midweek. Hope you're good. I can see you've been very active in the chat. I can see I wasn't late enough because no conspiracy theories flying around, which means I could have left you waiting a little bit longer than I did. I hope everyone's really good. Okay, so let's do what we're doing today. What are we doing today? We're gonna wrap up really the study. I kind of feel like we strangely enough, I feel like we did a pretty good job yesterday in terms of just getting a good overview of those 2 new studies that are out regarding the Black Brits. Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Wildflower. Regarding the the Brits carrying the West African ancestry. Let's not be controversial and call them Black Brits. But yeah, exactly. I think we got to a relatively good point. So we don't need to kind of flog a dead horse. So I actually thought today we can have a bit of fun. We can have a bit of fun because I'm not sure if all of you remember, but I did mention briefly that there was a site, there was a bit of coping going on with all of these recent discoveries. You know, English people don't cope very well with having anybody question their authority. They don't like it. They don't like people questioning their history, and they don't like people trying to question established narratives around racial superiority. They're fine. English people will be the most unracist people on the planet until someone tells them they're not superior. And that's when you will see their racism come out in spades. They cannot cope. They will literally crumble. You know, they're fine with, you know, they're very, you know, got no problem with anyone. Until someone says, hey, but you're not superior. You do realize that. That's when they'll show their true colors. So there's been a bit of that going on. In fact, a lot of it going on since Cheddar Man. I've been a massive amount of coping. Those of you who have been subscribed for at least a little while will know that I did a video responding to a English, I'm not going to call him a historian, an English parody historian called Simon Webb. And I had a couple of videos just kind of like dressing him down. They're kind of like related to me going through the Timbuktu manuscripts as well. But he just, you know, making stuff up. He just literally makes stuff up about Black people, makes stuff up about Africans, and just says the most worst, the most awful and unsupported claims about Black people in order to make himself feel better about white people. I don't know. That's the only thing that I can think of. He's the one that hates the Black Bantus. Everybody's, if you can't just be Bantu, you have to be a Black Bantu. that was his thing. He's an idiot. Yeah, he has the channel History Debunked, that moron. So I'm not going to be nice about him because there's a point to which I'm going to be professional and nice and kind about people, and then when they cross a certain line, when I can see they're just aggressively racist, then they're just going to get the full backlash of my tongue. I'm not going to hold back and pretend that I'm okay with it or try and be professional, because I'm not dealing with an academic here. I'm dealing with a moron. So anyway, that's a bit of a digression. The point being that there's some entertainment. There's an entertaining site that I wanted to take you through yesterday, So I think let's start off by going through the last few slides on my slideshow, kind of like telling you some other stuff that I've seen on that study. Then we can kind of wrap it up. I mean, I went through it. I don't think there's going to be much value in me reading through the study. So rather than me doing that, I will place the links to the study into the comment section of this live stream and the first live stream as well, so that if you ever want to go through it in full detail, you can. But I don't think there's much value in me doing that. I feel like we got the overview, we got the gist of it. I mean, is everyone okay with that? And then today, I think we'll just have a bit of a light one going through this website and reacting to the copes, the copium that people are having to consume given these revelations. So we'll do that today. Okay, cool. A few people said I'm cool. I'm happy with that because that's kind of what I want to do. So let me find that website because here it is. No doubt I'm gonna have this because the website gives me a feeling that this person has a bit of a following. So no doubt me responding to this website is gonna get me placed on a Reddit somewhere, and I'm gonna get his people trolling my videos. It wouldn't be the first time, so I don't actually care. So there you go. Screen's dark because I haven't presented anything yet, but I'm going to present something right now for those of you who are missing the visuals. So let's do that right now. So let me share my screen. Bada boom. Screen. Let's go for that one. And share. So this is it. So this is. Someone said we don't want trolls. I know we don't. But hey, what are we gonna do for amusement if we don't read websites like this? It's important as well, I think, to just kind of like see how narratives are. I'm not going to use the word twisted. I'm going to say conformed around people's biases, you know, because why not, you know? I found it amusing reading through it. I might not find it amusing this time around. Let's go. Let's see. But this is in relation to, anyway, did black people build the Stonehenge? And someone's kind of come back and they're like, no, you know, were the builders of Stonehenge black? Debunked. So obviously that caught my attention. I was like, okay, I'm going to read this. This might be good. And I thought I was going to be very clear on some of the arguments that are raised in this. But he actually hit me from left field and surprised me. So let's go through this. And it's not an intensely long read. Let's go through it together and see what kind of thing we get. This article gets up to. Let me zoom in a bit so those of you who want to read along can. There we go. Got full screen there. So the recent report on ancient DNA and human pigmentation has sparked controversy. So this was released probably shortly after I did my video and shortly after a few people had responded to it. And obviously it had probably irritated 75% of the reform voting population of the UK, particularly in how social and commercial media have misrepresented its findings. So apparently social media, the media has misrepresented the findings. I always find it very amusing to hear Eurocentrists complaining about misrepresentation, media misrepresentation. It's so ironic to me because the media has literally, it's like, I just can't. Sometimes I literally can't with these people. And it's like, seriously, the media has been your greatest ally in the spreading of lies continually for the past 200 years. And you're going to moan that they're not purely Eurocentric in everything that they do. I find it hilarious. Anyway, the study suggests that early inhabitants of Britain, including those who may have built Stonehenge, have abundant melanin in their skin. Now, he's put it a good way there. Okay, that's largely what he's argued here is pretty much indisputable. That's the indisputable part. I thought he was going to argue against the fact that they're black. Okay, but let's carry on. But does this not equate them being black in the model racial sense? Instead, the study's broad terminology, particularly its classification of dark-skinned individuals, has led to widespread misunderstandings. Blackhenge, debunking the media misinterpretation of the Stonehenge builders. Let's carry on. One of the key failings in how the media reported the findings is the assumption that dark skin in ancient populations is equivalent to the complex racial identities we use today. Now, that in itself is a fair enough statement, okay? Might be the only one that I read today, but that in itself is a fair enough statement, because the racial identities we have today are very complex in that a lot of people we classify as black aren't even dark skinned, okay? So we've got this thing called race, which seems to shift and bend and elastically form itself and conform itself to the ideals of the person who's either wielding it as a source of pride or wielding it as a weapon against someone else. So we do have this thing that shifts and bends. Not all black people are dark skinned. Very few black people are actually black. We're brown for the most part. And there's a lot of people who are phenotypically lighter than people who aren't classified as black, but they're members of the black race. So we have these weird things. So I'm going to give him that one. That's a sentence I agree with. Instead of a nuanced look at genetic pigmentation, some outlets have claimed outright that black people built the Stonehenge, which is a significant misrepresentation. Well, is it though? The question is, would we call those people black today? Yeah, would we call them black today? No, black, the whole idea of race doesn't really exist. So we can only ask, in today's social circumstances, if that person were alive today, would they be regarded as a black person or not? The builders could have had a range of pigmentation types, including those commonly associated with modern Europeans. Well, that kind of goes counter to dark skin. Okay, so this is where the coping begins, such as pale, freckled, and red or blonde hair. So this is where it falls apart. And by the way, I'm not saying that this is not possible, but I'm saying in the context of the study that he's referring to, this is just being made up. Okay, that's what the issue is. This part here is just being made up. So let's read on. So by the way, he has this image here, which you can see its purpose is to evoke anger. Now, this is just an innocent poster about Black history, brilliant Black British history. Okay, and it's got different contributions of different characters in British history. But what has grinded his gears, obviously, is the Stonehenge in the back over here. Okay, and the very idea of its association with these blacks. This is the kind of thing that you'll see. I mean, I think this is a wonderful illustration, but he clearly has an issue with this. That's there to stoke some controversy. Although this may be an effort to balance our biased history, and this is the argument you hear a lot from particularly British Eurocentrists. Oh, well, I understand your need to balance history, which is clearly biased in our favor, but what can we do? We built everything. So you're always begging us for crumbs of history. It's like they'll only hear what they want to hear. Their own scientists will turn around to them and saying, hey, bucko, they weren't white. That's what their scientists are saying. Remember, we're not saying that. Yeah, we're not the geneticists. It's not an Afrocentric team that decide to test these people and decide that they have dark to black skin. Dark to black skin. Yeah, we didn't do that. Your scientists did it. Okay, it means your whole myth of white supremacy is crumbling apart. But let's carry on. The claims about Stonehenge are not true. That's I'm right because I said so. Let's carry on. The issue with broad terminology. One of the key issues in the report is the lack of precision in skin tone classification. Now, this is just false completely, because you guys will know, because we've done extensive studies on this channel on the high-risk plex model. And actually, when it comes to the prediction of dark skin, the high-risk plex model has an accuracy rate of over 98%. It's always correct when it predicts dark skin. It only gets really poor when you start leading towards the pale end. And in terms of predicting pale skin, that is almost a 50-50. It drops right down. But at the top end, dark skin and dark to black skin, when it predicts those pigmentations, it's always right. Or most of the time, you know, more than 9 times out of 10 is correct. Let's carry on. The study divides ancient populations into 3 general categories: dark, intermediate, and light. This is also incorrect. There are 5 categories, okay? 5 categories in the high risk plex when it comes to predicting complexion, not 3. There is a 3 complexion model as well that's more simplified, but that wasn't referred to in the study he's talking about. However, this system lumps olive skin, freckled individuals together with people with deep brown skin. Now, where did he get this from? We looked at the model that they used yesterday, the Fitzpatrick scale, and freckled people are literally type 1. Okay. He said, which can be misleading when applied to historical narratives. So this is now where he's just making stuff up. Okay. Let's just quickly refresh on that so you guys know that I'm not making this up. Okay. This is I'm going to pull up my slideshow so you can have a quick glance at Fitzpatrick model example that we got in there. So let's have a look here. I'm just going to quickly scroll up, pull this on the screen so we can all remember. So remember, this is the Fitzpatrick scale on the right hand side, the Fitzpatrick scale, and this is the high risk plex model for predicting skin pigmentation. And you can see these first percentages, these first things that are basically percentages show you the accuracy rate of the prediction. So I was a bit out. I said 98. It's 96%, but with plus or minus 3%. So that's what we'll get out to 98%. So 96% with plus or minus 3% at predicting dark to black skin. So if it predicts dark to black skin, it almost certainly is correct. At dark, it's 87% with a plus or minus almost 1%. But when we get down to very pale skin, we got, it drops down to around 75% with a plus or minus 5%. Okay, so it drops down quite a lot. But the point being that if it predicts dark to black skin, then it's pretty much got it right. Now, here's your dark skin. Here's your brown skin. Can you see these 2 characters at the top here? You can probably barely see them. They're both freckled. Okay, these are red-haired, freckled people. They are clearly type 1. Clearly type 1. There's no debate about that. So how he managed to say freckled individuals together with people with brown skin, I don't know where he got that from. Don't know if he just made that up, but he's clearly incorrect. And he's made a whole chapter about it. Let's read this. The freckled redhead problem, he's called it. Misclassified as dark. Okay, this is I knew I found this article for a reason. This is gonna be hilarious. Let's carry on. Freckled individuals present an interesting challenge. Freckles are a sign of melanin. Yes, pheomelanin. Yeah. But in an uneven distribution rather than high overall melanin levels. Okay, so in his world, freckles are a result of little dense spots of melanin rather than being spread all over the face. I think that's what he means. Red-haired, blue-eyed individuals with freckles, such as those associated with ancient Irish populations, including some early Britons, would have been technically classified as dark-skinned under the report's broad terminology. What are you talking about? This is just so not a thing. This is so not a thing. That's not a thing at all. Okay? Eumelanin and pheomelanin are completely different types of melanin, and the high risk plex model doesn't do a melanin density check. It doesn't measure how much melanin you've got. It looks for specific SNPs associated with pigmentation, which you either you either are present or certain mutations are or aren't present. That's how it works. It doesn't do some measure of your melanin density. Let's carry on reading though, because this will be a good way for us to realize how they just make stuff up. Okay, freckled individuals tend to have pale skin, type 1 to 2. Oh, he got that right. There we go. Type 1 to 2. There we go. Not deep brown skin, type 6. Okay, 5 or 6 I would have said for deep brown skin, but anyway, let's say type 6. The classification method used in the report fails to differentiate between high eumelanin, deep brown skin, and localized pheomelanin. What are you talking about? That's not how the high-risk works. Okay, so this is like the definition of coping. You know, when someone just says cope, this is what the definition of coping is. When you just decide you're just gonna make something up, you know, throw enough, you know, crap at the wall and hope it sticks. That's the expression we use in the UK. This means that Stonehenge could have been built by individuals with red or blonde hair. Can you see how the logic has built up here as well? This means that Stonehenge could have been built by individuals with red or blonde hair, blue or green eyes, and freckles, who are now mistakenly included as dark-skinned categories. He hasn't qualified this. He just said it. Freckles, type 1. I'm sure when he said this, type 1 and type 5, he probably, or type 1, type 6, he probably wasn't aware that the high-risk plex model actually refers to the Fitzpatrick model, because otherwise he wouldn't have said that, and he would have known that type 1 and type 2 are clearly classified, okay, as pale and very pale. Okay, that's it. You know, there's no discussion to be had here. This is not just an academic issue. It has real-world implications by misrepresenting the pigmentation of ancient populations. The media reinforces misleading narratives about identity, race, and migration in prehistory. Yes, that is absolutely true. But not in this case, okay? In this case, you are the person misrepresenting history and hoping to dear God that you can write black people back out of the story. I mean, I didn't even get this. What's the point in this? So let's read the caption. Media need clickbait to sell stories these days. So I don't know who did this. I'm sure. What is the point? Okay, all right. Let's get back to serious now. Okay, key genetic findings from the report. The study also reveals how genetic markers for pigmentation changed over time. The first instances of lighter skin, SLC24A5 gene mutation, appeared in Mesolithic Northern Europe, Sweden, and France. It didn't in Cheddar Man, who he's talking about here, but let's leave that aside. The presence of blue eyes peaked during the Mesolithic period before decreasing in the Neolithic period and rising again in the Bronze Age. Yes, that's actually on the report itself, so I'd agree with that. Okay, hair color remained mostly dark until Bronze Age, when more variation emerged due to gene flow from Anatolia and Pontic steppe. Okay, and when he talks about variation here, we're really just talking about one single mutation that causes difference in hair tone. Okay, because it is all a full hair color change is just a form of melanin regression, basically. That's all it is. So there's it's not like, oh, you know, all these. We don't have multiple colors. You either have melanin in your hair, you're either eumelanin dominant or you're pheomelanin dominant. That's it. There's nothing really else in terms of the discussion regarding hair color. Without full MC1R sequencing, early red-haired individuals in Britain may have been misclassified as darker-haired. No, that the report doesn't say that part. Okay, the report doesn't say that part. He's just making that up again. So this is where you have to be really careful, because he's actually highlighted that and called that key findings from the report, but then he's just made up this last point. Okay, and this is how you get idiots like Simon Webb, who aren't very literate, but they'll pick up stuff like this and then they'll make a whole half-an-hour video about, oh, you know, that report was totally taken out of context. You know, it was totally taken out of context. The black Bantus had nothing to do with the ancient British civilization. This is where morons like him get their sustenance from. Additionally, the Study supports the idea that pigmentation evolved gradually over thousands of years, including influenced by migration, diet, and environmental adaptation. I don't think he read the report properly either, because one of the report authors, Dr. Selena Brace, makes it clear that since Cheddar Man, in fact, I've got the report in front of me, I could just pull it up, I've got it on paper, but since Cheddar Man, there have been 2 population replacement events. Okay. Now, genetics would politely classify those as bottleneck events. Okay. But what they are population replacement events. Okay. So this is why we know Cheddar Man doesn't have descendants in the modern British population, because all of Cheddar Man's descendants are dead. Okay. And they were replaced by an incoming population. That's how they know this. So this whole idea is nice about gradual pigmentation evolution over time, but actually the evidence points to a different complected, for want of a better word, a lighter complexioned population coming in and essentially replacing by violence the one that was there before. And then another one coming in after that one and replacing by violence that one. That is what the genetics states. Okay, so that's what you have to deal with there. How the media got it wrong. Let's carry on. Because the report states that melanin was more abundant in early Britons, so his big cope here is saying it was melanin, but it was all stored in the freckles. It was all stored in the freckle. There was big banks of melanin deposited in the freckles that had the genetic study confused. Some media outlets jumped to the conclusion that the builders of the Stonehenge were black Bantus. In the modern racial sense, the genetic evidence does not support this. Instead, the report tells us that lighter skin only became common in Britain during later Bronze and Iron Ages. So he's cleverly add the word only there. Now, that's not what the report says. The report is quite conclusive that these populations, as a whole, were dark-skinned, dark or dark to black-skinned. Now, I know people really have an issue with this, but you can't lean on genetics for one conclusion and then discard it. It's kind of like, I know where I stand when it comes to these things. I'm very, very clear, and I've actually, shared that with you guys multiple times. Now, these are the same people who will argue, genetics tells the story, this, that, and the other. We're the same people. We're the Brits, this, that, and the other. But then when the study turns around and says unequivocally, fine, you're British, but at this time, all British people were dark-skinned. And then you have to ask a very logical question. If you believe in out of Africa, okay, if you believe that's the most plausible theory for the origin of mankind, then you have to understand that you didn't leave Africa with red hair and freckles, melanin deposited freckles, okay? You didn't leave Africa with that look, okay? You left Africa as black people, okay? So and the report is quite clear that the darkness, the pigmentation that you left Africa with stayed in general across multiple populations until very recently. That's what everything tells us. So the idea that these populations weren't black is just a cope. Are you just some kind of mysterious non-black black-skinned population that no longer exists? Do we have to make populations up, or can we accept the fact that populations were black before they weren't? It's not. I don't think it's that deep, and I can understand how people like this struggle with this. Let's carry on anyway. Let's carry on. This misunderstanding can be traced back to overgeneralized classifications in the report, grouping olive, tanned, and freckled individuals into dark-skinned. Once again, this is just made up. Okay, it doesn't say that. We can refer back every time we feel like there's a bit of a cope going on, let's refer back to our model, okay, which is the high-risk model. Okay, if it says dark skin, it's saying that the person is sitting somewhere in type 5. Okay, if it says dark to black skin, it's saying that the person is sitting somewhere here in type 6. So if it says dark skin, that's what it's saying. If it says intermediate, that's when you can start talking about your more Arab olive skin tone. You can see olive is here, type 3. That would clearly be intermediate. Okay, moderate brown skin, that would be kind of like your modern Arab / North African, sits more in type 4. But when it comes to dark and dark to black, that's your 5 and 6. Okay, those are pigmentations associated with South Asians and Africans almost exclusively. Okay, you kind of have to deal with that. All right, let's carry on. Sensationalized media headlines that equate high melanin levels with modern black African ancestry. And once again, even this modern black African ancestry, that's a projection of his own racism there, because I'm sure none of them use that phrase modern black African ancestry. They just say black. Okay, they were black, and as soon as you hear black, you go crazy, you go mad. Oh wow, they weren't West African, they weren't Yoruba. Unfortunately, the study that we went over yesterday suggests that they may very well have been Yoruba, which is hilarious. But you know, this is the kind of angry response that you get. And then the failure to consider how genetic traits like freckles and red hair, there was no, this is the funniest one. The failure to consider how genetic traits like freckles and red hair interact with skin tone. Yeah, I think everyone knows how freckles and red hair interacts with skin tone. Yeah, it's called type 1. Okay. Freckles and red hair, yeah. The interaction of freckles and red hair means you're type 1. All right. There's no failure to understand that. Okay. There's no human being on the planet who has ever seen someone with freckles and red hair and said, oh, you're pretty dark, ain't you? Oh, you're pretty dark. Oh, when are your parents Nigerian? You look like my Nigerian buddy. Like, and don't get me wrong, I love my ginger people. Yeah. We always say, you know, gingers and black people, we got this kind of like, you know, we got this thing. Yeah, there's a lot of love. So I'm not sowing any discredit here. Okay, but what I am gonna do is say physically, there's never been a confusion. I've never mistaken. It could just be me, but I've never mistaken a ginger for a Jamaican. You know, could just be me. I don't know. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I don't know. I don't know what this dude's talking about, man. This is some serious A-class coping. Let's read the conclusion. Have a bit of a laugh there. Okay, so conclusion: a call for more precision in pigmentation studies. The study on ancient DNA and human pigmentation is valuable. Okay, that's cool. That's magnanimous for him to say that. Still, its broad terminology has led to confusion. Yes, confusion on your part, clearly thinking that redheads are confused for dark skin by the model. Instead of claiming that the builders of Stonehenge were black, a more accurate interpretation would be the early Britons had higher melanin levels than today, but this included a wide range of skin tones, including freckled individuals with red hair. They could say that, but that would be a lie because it doesn't. Okay, it doesn't. All right. It says they were black because by the model's standard, they had dark to black skin. That's why it said they were black. It's like, well, really, the only living populations with these complexions are black people. So it's probably fair to state that these people were black. Okay. They hadn't, if you said that light skin was an evolution, well, they hadn't evolved it yet. So then what are they at that stage? Not that difficult. The idea that Stonehenge was built by black people, you can almost hear the disdain in his voice. The idea that Stonehenge was built by black people, as understood in modern racial terms, is a media exaggeration. Why? Because you don't. What were they then? That's the thing. Talk to these people and say, well, how would you classify someone with my complexion? Okay, living in England, what would you call them? Would you call them a dark white? Should we make up a new term? There were dark whites. Actually, I say a new term. They used to call them Hamites, didn't they, back in the day? Yeah, should we make up a new ethnicity to make you feel better? More precise genetic research and classification systems are needed to avoid these misinterpretations in future studies. No, there's no misinterpretation, only on your part. Clearly a misunderstanding of the power of melanin in freckles. That's all. An overestimation of melanin in freckles, clearly, is what is the issue here. If we want to understand our past accurately, we need more precise language in scientific studies and more responsible reporting from the media. Stonehenge's builders were likely diverse in their pigmentation. Clearly, freckled and red-haired, called to you. We're calling them black as an oversimplification. That does not align with the actual genetic findings. Once again, because I said so, but totally contradiction what the actual genetic findings were, and the fact that the high-risk plex model, once again, let's just quickly revisit. Okay, when it predicts dark to black skin, 96% with a plus or minus 3 to 4% accuracy. Yeah, it's pretty darn accurate when it makes those guesses. All right, high probabilities. And we know this is, we're never going to deal with certainties, but high enough. By recognizing the complexity of ancient human pigmentation, we can ensure that historical narratives remain rooted in evidence rather than modern identity politics. And then he's got this beautiful CGI image of a red-haired, I don't know, brownie copper skinned. I guess this is his hope of what these humans look like. Okay, fine. whatever tickles your fancy. You know, we're just doing the whole, you know, PlayStation thing now. I guess the builders were Cro-Magnons with red hair, green eyes, and freckles. Hence the confusion. Once again, no confusion. All right, so we're not going to read anymore. I mean, we could carry on. There's another article about Cheddar Man here. I'm not going to. That's all. I just wanted to share that with you. I told you that was going to be fun, guys. I told you that was going to be fun. Isn't the coping just absolutely hilarious? I mean, these guys are just. They fall apart when these studies come out. We're over here just like yesterday and today, just trying to kind of like pick at the study, figure out what's going on here, figure out what the implications of the study are, but we're able to read it as a whole. But yeah, you got these guys, and they're just making stuff up as they go along. Well, it wasn't. What they don't understand is the melanin density in the freckles created. Dude, man, you're doing too much. James, thank you very much. He said all of this anti-black historical fiction is rooted in the fact that this entire modern white world order is built on what was stolen from Africa. Well, you said it, I didn't. I think one thing that people will find shocking about history, I mean, the amazing thing is I love the fact that we on this channel can have these conversations now, because I remember maybe just over a couple of years ago when I was very pensive about raising the entire topic of black people in Europe, because it made people feel very uncomfortable, even people who believe in Black Egypt, you know. It made them feel very, very uncomfortable. The entire notion that black people had anything to do with Europe. And that's because the way we were all raised in terms of our education system, which essentially taught us that black people had nothing to do with Europe. Blacks are Africa, Europe's whites, browns are Asians. That's kind of how all of our brains worked. But with each study that's being released, I think people are now adjusting and understanding that the influence and the imprint of original indigenous man, and that's really how I like to phrase it, original indigenous man, which is the African, okay, the black man, if you want to say that, okay, is everywhere. The imprint of indigenous man is everywhere, and they are indigenous to every continent. And reclaiming that entire history is a much slower and bigger build, but at least there's progress being made now. Let's see how that all goes. Now, I do want to share a couple of things with you. And I'm going to just quickly say thank you to Macy. He says, facts are black people were everywhere. And I'm going to concur. That's a fact. We are basal to every continent. Okay. They know that easily on a genetic level. That's indisputable. Okay. So then the argument or the discussion becomes what happened on every continent and how recently did these shifts in demographic take place. Yeah. That's the discussion that we need to be having. But the whole idea of black people not being present, and that's everywhere, by the way. And I know I'm going to get a lot of mad people here when I say this, and this includes the Americas, people. Okay, we are basal to every continent. So that means the discussion we need to be having is when did the replacement take place? Okay, when did the shift in demographics happen? Because everywhere that we're no longer present or no longer indigenous, there's been a point of a shift. Now, some people will argue in Americas, oh, it happened after the Olmecs. Some people will say, oh, it happened after this. Some people will say, oh, it happened during slavery. These are all the different discussions that we need to have. Okay. When did it happen in Europe? Some people will say, well, it happened after Cheddar Man. That was when the last black people were there. But some people say, oh, no, it happened after the Romans. Other people will say, no, it's more recent than that. They've just gotten rid of their black populations. It happened when they shipped the blacks to Sierra Leone from London. When did it happen in Asia? Okay. When did it happen in the Philippines? When did it happen in the Far East? It's happened in all of these places. This isn't quack stuff. This is all researchable, verifiable history. Black populations in every part of this globe being replaced. It's a harrowing, but also very interesting discussion to have. Thank you again, James. He says they weren't the black crowd. Black never have a model to define what black is. Absolutely. TKM actually creates a concise model for blackness. They can't hang. Thank you. What is that model, by the way? Let me know. I feel like even I flip-flop on blackness. It's so hard. But yeah, I feel you. I absolutely feel you. Thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. And I appreciate the donation as well, obviously. All right, so let's I wanted to show you guys a couple of things before we dive out today. I don't think it's going to be a long stream, but I want to show you a couple of extra slides that I added to the slideshow, just because I did have a bit of a read through those papers and the supplementary data, and there wasn't, like I said, there wasn't a huge amount more, and that's why I made the decision, you know, we're not going to go through those papers today because I feel like we discussed enough of the content for them to be relevant. But I did want to pick out a couple of things. So let's just have a quick read through to give us a bit of a refreshing. So geneticists reluctantly admit sub-Saharan ancestry. So we're talking about, if you weren't here yesterday, we're talking about the study which found 2 individuals in graves in Dorset and Kent, I believe it was, in the UK, dating back to around the 7th century CE or 7th century AD. Okay, and there's 23 individual or cadavers that they dug up, and they managed to do whole genome sampling on, and 2 of them came back with around 20 to 40% quote unquote sub-Saharan African ancestry relating to the Yoruba lineage. Now, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but I did mention yesterday the fact that they called it Yoruba YRI lineage. I said it seems like they've probably used the 1000 genomes panel, because that's basically the Yoruba YRI grouping is like a super group, because when they created the 1000 genomes panel, they had so few African samples that they created these super groups that encompassed broad amounts of ethnicities. Okay, so even it saying Yoruba is very broad. Okay, it doesn't mean it was closely related to Yoruba. It's just a broad kind of like encompassing a lot of West African ethnicities into a large supergroup. And I said, I suspect this is the 1,000 genomes. Well, I looked into the supplementary data and I found that it was the 1,000 genomes panel. So they're using a very, very outdated panel, and one that is very Eurocentric as well, one that is very heavily weighted towards, biased towards European genomes to analyze these. So even that, the fact that they've managed to pull out, 20 to 40% sub-Saharan DNA using that horrible, well, I'm not going to say horrible, using that biased panel, I won't use the word horrible, that's too emotive, using that biased panel says a lot, because if they was to use proper whole genome sequencing, or an African panel, a panel that's familiar with African genetic variety, it would be very likely that you'd see that percentage go up, probably substantially. And this is why they don't want to use these panels. Okay, we are going to expose these. I promise you that. We are going to get to the bottom of these genetic tests and really start to expose what they're doing. Let me give a quick shout out, a few donations. Min says, I love how they claim to be angered about identity politics when melanated facts destroy their historical fictions. In it, isn't that just the case? They're fine with identity politics until it's refuting them, until their own science refutes them on their identity politics, and then they've got an issue. Oh, no one cares what race it is. Why is that even important? Oh, it's not important now. Okay, if it confirmed that, these are the same people who, when King Tut's alleged Y-DNA paternal lineage came up as R1b, you had every single newspaper in America and the UK saying King Tut related to the Scottish. King Tut is King Tut is Prince Andrew's cousin. You had all kinds of crap coming out, basically saying he was in a very kind of muted way, basically saying King Tut was probably a white guy with red hair. That's what they went with, based on a single Y-DNA lineage, which is very, very prominent in Africa, by the way. But forget that it's prominent in Africa, because if it's prominent in Europe, that was always supersede its presence in Africa. Forget the fact that King Tut was African and R1b is very dense in Africa, because Europeans have R1b. So therefore, it doesn't matter if it's dense in Africa. He is now a European because he has it. Just like every single African that carries the R1b marker is actually European. It's actually a white person with red hair. That's kind of their thinking. But there you go. Thank you, Min. Door of L, thank you for your 2 donations of $1.49. I hope you did that deliberately. I hope you didn't get bamboozled by the YouTube donation system. But I appreciate you very much. Much respect to you. If I see a comment, I'll make sure I'll read. Oh, there you go. Said here, read this paper. Most Europeans had dark skin until the 4th century AD. Research reveals. Yes, I think that paper was a part of the study that is earlier in the slideshow. But I will thank you regardless of that. Thank you. I hope everyone can see that as well. Let's go back and maybe I'll go back and read it again at some point. So yeah, let's carry on. So 2 people lived in England during the early Middle Ages, had a recent sub-Saharan African ancestry, likely from grandparent. A new DNA analysis reveals. Both individuals thus show genetically and geographically mixed descent and had an estimated 20 to 40% ancestry characteristic of sub-Saharan Africa. Saya and colleagues wrote in the study, Up-Down Girl's DNA had affinity to that of present-day Yoruba, Mende, Mandenka, and Essa groups, the team found. And based on statistical model, the researchers proposed that both people had a grandparent with African ancestry, possibly from similar groups that left sub-Saharan Africa between mid-6th and early 7th centuries. Now, there is some interesting stuff that came up. So I want you guys to check out, there's some interesting stuff that came up. So this is from the study, and I just kind of like copied these quotes. It says here, African ancestry may or may not have been visible. I know we spoke about this already. No, we're going to skip past that because there's a couple. Here we go. Let's move on. So let's first of all have a look at this to just remind ourselves what this ancestry looks like when they put it through their admixture model. Okay, so the yellow part, and KD010, you can probably just about read that if you can. If you can't read it, it's no big deal. But this top one, I should say, with yellow in it, that's our guy from Worth Matrova's cemetery. That's the boy. And the one down here, this is the girl. Okay, and the yellow is the Yoruba ancestry. And remember, Yoruba is that big kind of like super group for a lot of West African ethnicities as defined by the 1,000 Genomes Project because of a lack of samples. And by the way, the reason it probably got classified as Yoruba is because I'd imagine that perhaps it was only Yoruba people who were donating their DNA to be tested. So it's not, when you see these studies and people are like, we know for a fact Yoruba is also, it came up in the there was a Middle Eastern study that took place to kind of like analyze the ancestry of modern Middle Eastern populations. It's quite a famous one. I can't remember the name of it, but they talked about how the modern Qatari people are like 40% Yoruba. Once again, now understanding how the 1,000 Genomes Project works, it doesn't necessarily mean it was Yoruba. It's a super group, once again, that is being Yoruba used as a proxy for probably a lot of African groups that could fall into that category. And then you also have the Schunemann study, where they came up, the plus 20% sub-Saharan African ancestry came up Yoruba. But once again, that is likely because they've used, once again, 1,000 Genomes panel, which creates this Yoruba supergroup, because Yorubas might have been the only, Black Africans in that region who were testing. So this is kind of like, this is how it works. But anyway, so we see here that ancestry. We then kind of had a look and we broke down the ethnic blends of these other groups, because this is the part that they don't want us to have a discussion about. They want us to kind of go, well, okay, well, that's that little bit of black there, a little bit of black there. So like I said, there was maybe a couple of, a pair of octoroons, but the rest of these people were white. But the one thing that we stressed is that, no, we're not going to forget the contributing groups that make up the rest of the ancestry. Okay, so the blue was, I think, Western hunter-gatherer, was it? Yeah, so the blue is Western hunter-gatherer, the green is EEF, early European farmers, and the red is Caucasian hunter-gatherer. And we just looked at the kind of like studies that are available. Ibero-Mauritians, Natufians, both basically essentially phenotypically black groups, both of them. Okay, and they are heavy contributors to the EES. Okay, the early European farmers. Then we had Western hunter-gatherers, and pretty much all of the studies bringing them back as dark to black. And they were exclusively dark to black until the rise in Anatolian DNA during the Mesolithic, apparently. And then we have the Caucasus hunter-gatherers, who are kind of intermediate to dark. All right, so these are the skin tones of the contributing groups, which suggests that our uptown girl and our other guy, our Worth Matrova's young male, may not have stood out as much as people think, or as much as the study writers claim they would have stood out, because of their African ancestry, because it seems like there's a lot of melanation going on, okay, a lot of darkness in the populations that they were found in. Now, obviously, once again, not making the argument that all of these people would be classified as black in today's day and age. I don't have enough data to make a kind of claim like that, but we have to look at everything and then make a informed decision based on that. Okay, and the contributing groups that they've put there are all in genetic studies come back with kind of like dark affinities. Now, let's move on to the next point that I wanted to raise. So, is this the best panel for the job? I'm going to quickly make this a bit larger, this text, because I want to read through this with you guys. Is this font size? Where's font size? There we go. So I'm just making this a bit larger so I can read through this. So, In all tests with the 1000 genomes project, so remember I said that, so this is the panel that they're using, superpopulations, the post-Roman Worth Matravers sample had more than 90% GBR/EUR ancestry. So you have to bear that in mind. Yeah, GBR, that's British and European ancestry. And that includes all of these massive groups that we're just talking about there, with the exception of KD10, which showed 25% African ancestry. Our unsupervised admixture highlighted the genetic homogeneity comprising three main components maximized in Western hunter-gatherers, early European farmers, and Caucasus hunter-gatherers. So my argument would be, once you've established, I would actually say do this before, and I'd say with any ancient DNA, they really should be looking to do whole genome sequencing, okay, rather than taking patterns based on modern Europeans, which is what they currently do, patterns based broadly, I'm not going to say exclusively, but broadly on modern European groups, and then basically trying to model the rest of the world, even though they know that modern Europeans are all very recent relatives with very, you know, equivalently not diverse genomes. Okay, they are not very divergent genomes. Now, these are very, very closely related people that are defining the way we analyze all DNA across all of time, you know, because we're going back in time and we're trying to make sense of ancient people using a small window of variance that's found in modern Europeans. This is where the issue crops up, and this is where the issue lies. So the 1000 Genomes project is broken, okay, or at least as a panel, it's broken. There are other panels like I mentioned yesterday, AGR, Top Med, which are far more informative and would tell you far more, but they don't want to introduce, or it seems to me, I could be incorrect, but it seems to me they don't want to introduce these broader panels that actually take into perspective all of that discarded African variants. They don't want to include it. Thank you very much to Crenshaw Grinder. He said, did any have the haplogroup A lineages in those remains? Because I know they found some with haplogroup A1 in both ancient and modern individuals in one study. I'll pull it up because I've got the supplementary data open. So I will pull that up, actually. That'll be interesting to look at. I don't know much about the uniparental marker. Well, not a huge amount, at least, about uniparental marker lineages. You know, I take those with a very much of a sprinkle of salt, but it will be interesting to have a look at that, see if you can make sense of that, or at least more sense than I can. So I included here just this admixture table, which I'm going to kind of read out this to you now. You won't be able to read it because I can barely read it, but let me read it to you. It says unsupervised admixture for K8, so that means 8 groups with the percentage of the genome that can be designated coming from the various groups. So you can see the individuals there, and basically the one takeaway from here is that only KD10 has African ancestry at 24.6%. There's another one that has that at 1%, KD13, but they don't think that's large enough to warrant. But I think that raises another question mark, and I'm going to support that in the next slide, actually, about what might be the case, because I've got a theory about what might be the case with this African ancestry that they found. Okay, so let me move on to the next slide, and then I'll do what you requested, Crenshaw. We can have a look at the we can have a bit of a closer look. We won't do it for too long, but we'll have a bit of a closer look at the supplementary data, because there are a couple interesting things in there. So let me share with you the next slide, because this really piqued my interest. So this, without trying to be too complicated, is the results of the carbon dating. Okay, so this is calibrated radiocarbon dates from the post-Roman cemetery at Worth Matravers, with repeat dates for KD007 and KD010 shown. Okay, they basically ran carbon dating on these individuals, and here's what's really interesting. If I zoom in, okay, our male in Fort Matravers, who was one of the youngest ones, carbon dated really old. Okay, in fact, only one person carbon dated older, which was KD19. But you can see on his carbon date, he's dating to around 400 AD. Okay, and they've done it a couple times, and he was frequently coming up with the oldest. And I found that quite interesting. Now, what I couldn't find is, because I did look on both studies, I couldn't find the carbon date for the young female individual, but that pricked my my attention, because then that raises the question, at least to me, and I think you guys may have picked this up already, if these two individuals carbon date as the oldest individuals in these cemeteries, you know, maybe they're quite a bit older, as in they were buried perhaps before the other people who were buried maybe a few years after them, then that speaks to me of a possible population event. Okay, a possible change in population, or a possible, maybe not everyone, I'm not saying everyone was African or everyone was Yoruba, but maybe there was a population and these were the last members of a given population. Because if they showed up and they're just sitting right in the middle, or they came last, then it definitely gives weight to the visiting merchant argument. Okay, you know, a merchant ship came in or something like that, or just some tradespeople came or whatever, and they were the results of you know, some, you know, love making with a, you know, you know, with a grandma or something like that. However, if these people in both cemeteries, and I couldn't find the dates, I wish I could for the girl, but if these people both end up dating as the oldest people in the cemetery, then that means they could have come from a population where that ancestry was more present. It gives kind of like room for an argument there that it might be worth digging a bit more and seeing if you could find more people with that ancestry dating further back. I'm sure that's not the way they want to go with this study, but I think it at least raises that question mark. Okay, it certainly raises that question mark in my view, something that they should be paying attention to. So that's one of the things that just kind of like that did prick my attention. Let me quickly see if I can find what, because it's definitely in there. So I'm going to look at, I've got two sets of supplementary data, and I'm going to have a quick scroll through and see if I can find the part about the uniparental lineages. So I've got, they did some PC principal component testing on the individuals. I didn't find it, it was weird. I didn't find it particularly, I wasn't sure how valuable that is for this kind of test, but, and they weren't clear about how they define the principal components either, but either which way, we kind of know what to expect with 1/4 ancestry. But let's have a look and see if we can find those markers. So this was the result of an admixture test. Here's another thing that was interesting. The ancestry for up down girl, which is down here, okay, isn't purely, so let me read this out to you. So the colors are West African and Bantu speaking group. See, straight away that's a alarm bells to me. West African and Bantu being grouped into one supergroup is wild when you consider the amount of genetic diversity that exists between those two groups. That is wild. Do you know how that's more than the rest of the world combined, probably 5 times over, just within those two groups? If you will combine those two groups, that's wild. But this is what we're dealing with when we're talking about they don't respect, you know, African diversity. But anyway, let me carry on. So West African and Bantu speaking groups are in dark green. Ancient British, whatever that means, is in blue. Okay, Asian British is in blue. I don't know what Asian British means. Non-European ancestry. Where's the rest of the colors? I'm looking for the orange. Here we go. So ancestry maximized in East Africans is in orange. Okay, like Hadza and Dinka. Okay, and then we've got Bedouins, Saudi, and Egyptians in yellow. So if we look at her, she's actually got a tiny bit of the yellow, but she's also got quite a, I mean, that's about a 10% chunk from what I can see here of the orange and then the green. So this is where the 40%, because I was looking before and I was like, where are they getting that 40% for? Because these bars look 25% max. If I just go back to the slideshow and do a comparison, I was like, going back up, if you look at her ancestry here, that's 25% max you're looking at there. So you're like, oh, that's not a lot. But what they didn't tell you, okay, and I think it's reflected here, is this orange part is East African ancestry. So then that's now another question mark that they haven't even gone into. Okay, they barely mentioned this in the main study. You have to go to the supplementary data to find this. So she's got a relatively, questionable proportion, it's not tiny, of East African ancestry. Then she's got that big chunk of quote unquote Bantu / West African ancestry. And then she's also even got that little chunk of Middle Eastern? Well, Bedouins, Saudi, Egyptians. That's even African. That's North African largely. That's kind of like North African with a little bit of the Middle East there. So if you look at her genome, that's like over 40% African. And that's not really what they sold. So there's enough there to kind of go, oh, well, that's a lot of, a lot of question marks there on this young lady. You made it appear like something very different when you presented it as a, it's just interesting. Let's see if I can find those uniparental lineages for our guy Crenshaw. If it's not on this paper, it's on the other supplementary paper, which I have open already as well. I'll just drag it onto the screen in a second. Oh, was I there? No. Okay, let me pull it up. I think it's here. Okay, so here's that carbon dating I was telling you about. So yeah, I just find it interesting because they run it a couple times. And I mean, let's look at the table over here. So KD 10, they ran twice. So it's like KD 10A and KD 10B. They ran it twice from two different parts of his body. One came back 435 to 605 AD, and the other one came out 600 to 650 AD. But other than, I don't know who C49 is. That was not part of the group. I don't think that's a different project. If you look within this group, the different KD ones, this is that 435 AD is the oldest date apart from KD 19, who has 430 AD. So that places KD 10 as one of the oldest samples by carbon dating. In other words, buried earliest, buried first. Okay. And I'm going to agree with this. Looking at her DNA, I'd say, well, so half black. I wouldn't agree with half black because she might be more than half black, but she's definitely half African. She's closer to half African. So then you have to raise the question about the African ancestry looking more like a single parent as opposed to a grandparent. Because why would they just look at that? I don't know. This is, there's a question mark there. So I kind of agree with that to some degree. I think there's definitely something to be, to be looked into there. Let's carry on. So there you can see it there again, the carbon dates with the two carbon dates on there. So I think irrespective, it's definitely got to classify as one of the oldest ones in the tombs. And then I think there's a question to be had there. I think there's definitely a conversation to be had if that the person ends up being the oldest in the tomb, or one of the oldest in the tomb. This is all about the carbon dates as well. I'm not going to read through all that. Let's see if I can find that, those markers. What's this? Oh, this is the isotope analysis, which gives us an idea about basically what their kind of like diet was and interaction with the environment. What is that? Sorry. Bear with me one moment, I'm sure I'll find it. So this is where I just showed you the data from the whole genome results, okay, and the fact that they, it says in all tests with the 1,000 genome superpopulations, okay. So I knew straight away from the Yoruba ancestry that that's what they were using. There we go. Okay, so here's what you're looking for. Here's what you're looking for. We haven't got this for both grave sites. We only no, we do have this. We have this in diagrammatic form for the female's grave site as well. So this is for you. I hope you're still here, James, because was it James who asked for this? I think it was. No, Crenshaw Grinder. I think it was, yeah, it's Crenshaw, sorry, who asked for this. So I hope you're still here, because here it is. Here's the lineages. Let me zoom in for you so you can have a look at the Y-DNA and the mitochondrial lineages and see if you can see if this is of interest to you. Let's zoom out a little bit. There. Okay, so like you said, yeah, there's two who have A there, KD009 and KD020. Oh no, there's four, KD022 and KD11. Okay. Why is it? No, sorry, that's not a lineage. That's just family. This is A, B, C, D. Sorry, this is just grouping them as families. Sorry, we got the mitochondrial lineage here. We haven't got Y-DNA. Let me see if that's in another table. I'm pretty sure they did have Y-DNA. So this is just the mitochondrial lineage. Sorry. So we've got the mitochondrial lineage here. Okay. So we've got different ones. We've got K here, HV. Don't know if this is of interest to you. U5B1. I'm pretty sure Uptown Girl might have had this mitochondrial lineage, just U5B1, maybe. I'm not sure. But I don't know if that was helpful to you. Just pop that on the screen so you could see that. And here you go. Here's your paternal lineages down here in this diagram. So let me see if I can zoom in a little bit for you. So no, this is just for a few of them, only 4 of them here, and these ones are all in the T2A1A. No, sorry, R1B, R1B1A2. But that's just the 4 of them. I know there was more than that. Let me see if I can find any more. A couple more in the R1B. It looks quite prominent. And you've got, I don't know what J1C1B is. You probably know more than me about this. R1B here, R1B here. So you're getting a few. I hope those are close enough for you to be able to view those. Okay, because I can't help that much with this. All right. So, oh, and there's a bigger one. There you go. There's your bigger chart with the lineages. So R1B. I think that's an attempt to join it all together. I'm not gonna act like I'm all fair with the matter with the uniparental marker lineages because I'm not that hot on that whole topic. Okay. I'll leave you to analyze that. So if you want to see more of that, have a look at the supplementary data. But I think that's kind of it. There's a few interesting things to look into. Like I said, I thought the 40% ancestry of up down girl, 40% clearly kind of like African ancestry of up down girl, was somewhat underplayed. Okay. that's me being totally honest with that. I think that was somewhat underplayed. I also think there's something interesting in and around the age of these. So if these end up being the oldest in the cemetery, then that just leaves the door open for there to be further studies in terms of where they came from. We don't have to propagate the idea that it was a single ancestor or something like that. We can start to look towards maybe these individuals had, you know, and you know what I find interesting? Here's my conspiracy hat on. They didn't publish, from what I can see, correct me if I'm wrong, but they didn't publish the radiocarbon dating results for Up Down Girl. I'm sure they didn't because I looked for them. And the reason that's interesting is because they rebuilt her lineage and had her kind of like fourth generation, so one of the youngest people in the cemetery. But the order could be disputed in terms of the way they did it. They said, well, we know this person is a second generation ancestor, so based on the fact that he's older than her, it must be her father or granddad or something like that, or mother. That's basically how they did it, kind of that way. And I was like, oh, that's a bit weird. But they didn't publish the radiocarbon dating. And if the radiocarbon dating says that, like with the young man, she's one of the oldest in the cemetery, then the way they've built that together all falls apart. And then we have to look towards, where did her ancestors come from? How long have they been in the UK? That's just another thing. Yeah. Moors from Spain. It's a very good question. Okay. I don't doubt that Moorish ancestry would look like that supergroup. Okay. A lot of people want to deny or want to separate West Africans from Northwest Africa, which is where the origin point of the Moors historically is. If you're going to look at, you know, those groups of people. So I wouldn't say that's a hop, skip, and a jump from the reality. That sounds quite sensible to me, especially if you look at actual paintings of Moors, you know, Moorish nobility across Europe. They all kind of look like they're from that region, and there's a reason for that. There must be, at least. So interesting study. But I think we'll wrap it up there. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. I think we had a bit of a laugh to start with. You guys now have got something to look at in terms of this study itself. Like I said, I'll post all of the links to the various bits and bobs of the study. Okay. So I'll post those so you have access to all of those. And yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. I want to give a quick shout out to Crenshaw Grinder again for that $25. Appreciate that. Door of L, thank you very much for your $3 in total donations. Min, thank you for your $5. James, thank you for your $5. Macy, thank you for your $2. And James, $10 in total. Much appreciated. Yeah, and I think we'll leave it wrapped up there. Just another quick heads up. Obviously, you know, guys, where I'm gonna go to. All right, 1,000 backers, 1,000 books. I'm not sure if we'll hit that, but we've had a good response so far. We're still on target to hit the target. I'd like to exceed the target and be able to give away more books, but I look forward to it if we do manage. Well, I should say when we do manage to hit that target of the campaign, I'll still have 20 books to donate and 2 non-profit events, and I'll be straight away asking you guys, where should these donations go to and what events do you want me to do? Okay, I'd like to do more, but I'm going to need help to do more. Okay, so I'm going to need more people to back the project for me to be able to do more than that. But yeah, I appreciate everyone who's backed it so far. It's growing well. Please try and if you haven't ordered a copy and you like what we do on the channel, then you got to get that, and you got to get it in spades in the book. So let me quickly share the link with you all so that you've all got access. If anyone wants to make a last minute purchase of Reconstructing Egypt, you'll be doing a good deed. All right. On that note, guys, have a very fantastic evening. I'm glad you had fun, RJ. Smelly, thanks for joining. Ligte Vel, Jobless Forever, Sion, Wildflower, Nerd Large, TYTH Yar. I know it's got something to do with thanks and something like that, but I can never work out those acronyms. But thank you very much for joining today. Yeah, and everybody else who's managed to sit through this stream, Macy, everyone, you've been much appreciated. Baby M, etc., etc. Naywan, have a fantastic evening all. I'll see you on the next one, which might be sooner than you think. Peace.